Okay, good afternoon for those of you attending this webinar live in Japan and the rest of East Asia. This is Takeo Hoshi, director of Tokyo College, and today's moderator for today's webinar. And as usual, this webinar will be in English, but comes with simultaneous translation into Japanese. So if you want to listen to the Japanese, please set your preferred language to Japanese using the interpreter button or 通訳 button in your webinar application. And let me start again, as usual, with some words about the Tokyo College. Tokyo College was created within the University of Tokyo in 2019, in February of 2019, with the purpose of generating new knowledge to contribute to the creation of an inclusive society. Under the slogan, Shaping the Future Together, we have been inviting distinguished scholars and intellectuals from various parts of the world and having them give webinars like this. So our activities are supported by your generous donations. Before this webinar had started, you must have seen a standby screen that contains QR code. If you scan the QR code, you can reach the website where you can donate some money to the Tokyo College so that we can continue these operations. If you miss that, we will show the same screen again, right? At the end of this webinar. So if you want to support us, you can just scan the QR code at the end of this webinar. And I hope you find webinars valuable and useful, and hope you can support us. Now, today, we have a very special guest. Professor Thomas Rumor is a renowned and world-famous scholar on biblical studies and president or head of Collège de France. He has written numerous scientific articles and books on the Bible, Judaism, history of Israel, and other related issues. And he also has many books aimed at general audience, the general public. We can say that Professor Rumor, who combines his rigorous scientific research with the effort to disseminate the research to the general society, really represents the institution that he leads, that is Collège de France. And before I introduce today's talk by Professor Rumor, let me say a few words on Collège de France, because Collège de France is an important institution that Tokyo College aspires to be. Collège de France is a unique institution with 500-year history of conducting research to advance the knowledge in all fields, from natural sciences and engineering to social sciences and humanities. Professors there are required to teach one new course each year, every year, on the current research they are conducting. The lecture courses are open to anyone who wishes to attend without any registration or fees. So Collège de France is a place for interdisciplinary research that has top scholars in all fields who not only conduct cutting-edge research, but also share their knowledge with the general society. And I talk about the Collège de France today because, as I said, it is what Tokyo College aspires to be. So it is quite an honor for us to have the leader of Collège de France with us today. And now about today's talk. Today's talk by Professor Rumor is titled Discourses about Environment and Nature in the Hebrew Bible. So this is about Hebrew Bible, but the discussion here is quite, I think, relevant to today's world where there seems to be heightened tension between humanity and nature again. So I very much look forward to the seminar. And for the commentator today, we have Professor Hiroshi Ichikawa, who is a professor emeritus at the University of Tokyo. And Professor Ichikawa is an expert on Judaic studies and was a professor at School of Humanities and Sociology at the University of Tokyo for about 30 years until 2019. So he overlapped with Tokyo College for a couple of months at the very last minute for his appointment at the University of Tokyo. So welcome back to the University of Tokyo, Professor Ichikawa. As usual, I ask Professor Romo to talk about 45 to 50 minutes, and then that'll be followed by Professor Ichikawa's comment for about 10 to 15 minutes. And we will go into more general discussion. And for the audience of the webinar, you can write in your questions using the Q&A function in your Zoom. And you can do this during the talk or comments. And I will be watching Q&A and share those after the talk and the comment by Professor Rumor and Professor Ichikawa. So let's start. Professor Rumor,
yes,
please.
Thank you very much. I try to share my screen. Okay, wonderful. Esteemed Director of the Tokyo College, dear Professor Hoshi, dear Professor Ichikawa, ladies and gentlemen in the screens, I only see a little audience here, but I know you're more numbers here on the screen. And I would like to thank you so much for inviting me. It's a big pleasure to be here in the Tokyo College. And I would also like to thank Professor Hoshi presenting the Collège de France. I think you will be 500 years a little later than us, but you started very well. And so it's a pleasure to be here after other colleagues you had already from the Collège de France. And it's a good opportunity to foster our partnership. And so I go to my talk because I was told not to be too long. So, okay, let me just say how I can. I just need to, okay. So, yeah, maybe you are a little bit astonished that I start with Godzilla. Godzilla is a very famous Japanese monster. I watched Godzilla movies when I was like 6 or 7 years old, and I was very much impressed. I think that the saga of Godzilla explores environmental themes, and although the fear of nuclear power in a post-war Japan, still traumatized by the atomic bombings. And this figure of Godzilla, it's a way to materialize a catastrophe, to create a narration after the catastrophe. And so this brings me to the Hebrew Bible, because many parts of the Hebrew Bible also deal with the catastrophe, the destruction of the city of Jerusalem and its temple and the exile. And this will trigger different discourses. So first of all, I think if we want to describe the content of the Hebrew Bible with a single slogan, the expression crisis literature would be a fitting one, because many books of the Bible are dealing with this problem, with this break of the Babylonian exiles as a major caesura of the history of Israel and Judah, but also as a starting point of a new beginning. On the historical level, it can indeed be claimed that the events of 597, 587 before the Christian era were in a certain way the starting point for the rise of Judaism, since they brought the traditional Judean religion to an end. And as we will see, this Judaism is the beginning of theological construction, especially by the members of the Babylonian Gola, the diaspora. I will come to this in a moment. So the Babylonian exile was used as a new origin myth for legitimating the true Israel. So why the events of 597 and 587 can be considered as a major crisis? First of all, the normal pillars of constitution of economical and ideological identity were abolished. The king and the high officials from the court were deported. And the geographical unity of Judah had come to an end. The palace and the temple were destroyed, and so nothing were working anymore in the way normal identity of a people is working. So if such catastrophes happen, normally there are two explanations in the ancient Near East. Either the national god has become angry with these people and abandoned it. This we can see in the Mesher Stela or in the poem of Era. So the national god of Israel, just to tell you, it's Yahweh. So you will see it written YHWH. Nobody knows exactly how it was pronounced, but for convenience, we will use this pronunciation. And so the first thing is the national god has become angry with the people. The second explanation can be that the national deity had been defeated by the more powerful gods of the invaders. That we can have, for instance, in Assyrian propaganda, but also in the biblical books of 2 Kings 18, where the Assyrian king is saying that Yahweh is of no help and that the Assyrian gods are much stronger. So, contrary to earlier estimation, which allowed for a very low percentage of exiled Judeans, recent publications tend to increase this amount. So the estimation is there was about 20 to 60% of the population that diminished, so by deportation, by death, or by emigration. So the land of Judah was kind of empty, and the majority of the population gathered in Benjamin, which is just a little bit in the north of Judah. Jerusalem was not working anymore as the capital. Mitzpah has become the new administrative center. And what is not so much often mentioned in research is that there may also be environmental reasons for the exile and the following diaspora situation. So there's an article I would like to refer to by Bob Becking, Global Warming and the Babylonian Exile. So if you look at the results of paleometeorology, it appears that one can observe variation in climate which may appear for different reasons, such as changing distances between the sun and the earth, the rotation of the globe, and many others. Researchers in the changing of the climate of the Holocene, the name of our current geological epoch, which started around 9750 BCE, after the last glacial period, show that the post-glacial period is characterized by a rapid rise of the sea level worldwide because of the melting of the glaciers. And this rise stabilizes around 5000 BC and even decreases later. So I don't want to tell you the whole story, and I'm not a geologist, but what is important for us is that the climate throughout the Holocene shows significant variability. And it seems that the time of the destruction of Jerusalem and the Babylonian exile coincides with the period of global warming, where around 450-400, the time of Esdras Nehemiah, was a time of decrease of temperature. So this change of temperature may have some influence also on the Hebrew Bible. Several texts in the Hebrew Bible, in fact, speak about famine and drought. In the story of Elijah and the king Ahab, there is a drought that lasts several years. In the book of Genesis, we have Abraham that he has to go to Egypt, as well as Joseph, because of a famine. So these texts may reflect, in fact, environmental issues. So the exilic period, the period of deportation, is apparently a period of increasing drought. And so one may imagine that the deportations that the Babylonians put in place are also linked to the necessity for the Babylonians to import workers to fill the field and the canals in a period of drought. So it's maybe not just for reasons to show superiority, but there's maybe also the need of economical increase of workers to work on the field. And we know that in contrast to the Assyrians, the Babylonians allowed the exiles to live together in colonies or to form recognizable groups. So on the map here, you see a lot of names that are mentioned in the Bible and also in Flavius Josephus. Some of the places are not easy to identify, but what is important is that we can see that there was a very important Judean habitation in Babylonia. So this is one indication for the importance of the Babylonian diaspora, which is called in the biblical text often the Gola, the exile. And we have Babylonian cuneiform tablets from a collection, Musayev collection, that contain a contract, for instance, for sale of animals. We have persons that bear Yahwistic names. And in addition, one of the contracts is said to have been concluded in a city named Al-Yahudu. Al-Yahudu, which means the New Judea. This name corresponds to the name used in a Babylonian chronicle to designate Jerusalem. So it's possible that they founded a city called New Jerusalem in Babylonia. So you see that they thought that they will settle for a long time in Babylonia. So that's very important also to understand the impact of the Babylonian exile for even the writing of many texts of the Bible. I will come back to this in a while. According to Bowden and others, the population of Mesopotamia increased from 480 BC on, thanks to better climate conditions. Especially there was more water in the Tigris and Euphrates, which made irrigation easier. And if we bring the situation of the Gola together with this climate change, which were beneficent for agriculture and which contributed to the prosperity of the Judahite population in Babylonia, who were not eager to return to the former land. So after the Persian, they could have returned to Judah, but they were not very, very eager to go there. So the climate change contributed to the prosperity of the community in Babylonia, so that the exile became a diaspora. And that's very important because contrary to Christianity and to Islam, Judaism has always been a religion of diaspora. Even after the foundation of the State of Israel in 1948, most Jews in the world are living in diaspora. And I think this is a major difference between Judaism and Christianity and Islam. But we can talk to this later. So we have seen that 587 is a major break. It's a crisis. And of course, humanity has experienced so many crises. And the question is how people react when they are confronted to crisis. And here I would like to refer to a book. It's unfortunately in German. It's an important book because it was reedited in 2014. The original book is from 1993, and it's called Semantics of Crisis. And Steil was interesting in the way how the French Revolution was understood, appreciated by different intellectuals and other people. And so he's a sociologist influenced by Max Weber. So I heard from Professor Ichikawa that Max Weber was translated into Japanese, so you may be familiar with this work. So he uses these ideotypes of Max Weber in order to characterize different attitudes in regards to a crisis. So he distinguished the prophet, the priest, and the mandarin. So the prophet, according to this interpretation, is somebody who thinks that the crisis is necessary and that the crisis will bring a better future. So he has a utopian view. in regard to the French Revolution. This would be somebody like Rousseau, for instance. The priest or the priestly attitude reflects the position of representative of the collapsed social, political, and religious structures. The way of the priest to overcome the crisis is to valorize the times of the origins, going back to mythical origins and say everything was given in the beginning and we should go back to this beginning. So it's also a way to, of course, to try to maintain former privileges by the construction of this origin myth. And then the third attitude, according to Steil, inspired by Weber, is the mandarin. According to Steil, the mandarin are people that belong to the high officials. And in front of the crisis, they're saying, we don't know what the crisis will bring. But first of all, we need to understand why this crisis happened. So what they are doing is to do historiography, tell a history that explained why this happened. And I think it's interesting that we can have the prophet, the priest, and the mandarin also in biblical literature. So I just to remind you that Steil was not at all interested by the Bible, so I just take over this model from Steil and apply it to biblical texts. So let's start with the prophet or the prophetic attitude. And I would focus here especially on the second part of the book of Isaiah, which is chapters 40 to 55, which was probably originally an independent collection and was added then to the scroll of Isaiah. As we have seen already that how you can understand the catastrophe or the fall of Jerusalem, here it's understood as a sign of divine anger. I was angry with my people, I profaned my heritage. Can you read in Isaiah 47? Something similarly we have also in Assyrian and Babylonian inscriptions. In the inscription of the Babylonian king Nabonidus, it is said for the destruction of Haran, Sin, the king of all gods, which is a lunar god, became angry with his city and his temple and went up to heaven, and the city and the people become desolate. Or we have also an inscription of Esarhaddon that relates exile to divine wrath, but insists also that the deity can change its mind and come from anger to mercy. So this is also what happens in 2nd Isaiah. Because in 2nd Isaiah we can read, for a brief moment I abandoned you, but with great compassion I will gather you. In overflowing wrath for a moment I hid my face from you, but with everlasting love I will have compassion on you, says Yahweh, your Redeemer. So that means here that the intervention of the God of Israel will restore his people, but also the nature. And this is a text that we can find in chapter 43, where the new creation is described in two ways. There will be water in the wilderness, and even the animals will honor the God of Israel. So the water in the wilderness, this first statement, may reflect indeed a concrete meteorological change that we have mentioned already, the end of a warm period and the facility of irrigation. On the picture here on the screen, which you have a farmland in the area north of Al-Hasaka in Mesopotamia, you may have an illustration what it means to have a river in the wilderness. You see the river and you see the wilderness. And this is exactly what Isaiah is speaking about. And the idea that Yahweh is honored by the animals is something that we can find also in other texts, Psalm 104. And this points to an evolution in the understanding of Yahweh, who is not only the God of Israel, but also the God of all creatures and also the God of nature. And this is different that we can find now in the second attitude, which is the so-called Mandarin attitude, the Deuteronomistic history. This idea of a Deuteronomistic history which may be something a little bit strange for some of you who are not familiar with biblical studies. But this is a very important idea. And this was invented 1943 by Martin Noth, which you see here on the screen, who thought that the books from Deuteronomy, Joshua, Judges, Samuel, and Kings are bound together by somebody he called the Deuteronomist, because it's very inspired by the book of Deuteronomy. And Martin Noth was saying that this Deuteronomistic was the work of a man who wanted to answer the question of the sense of the events of the exile, through the composition of a comprehensive history. So the idea is that we have a history in order to explain why the fall of Jerusalem and the exile happened. And according to the Deuteronomistic, if we follow Martin Noth, it was because the kings and the people did not obey to the divine laws that are written down in the book of Deuteronomy. So the theory of Martin Noth has triggered a lot of discussion among biblical scholars. And I don't give you the whole discussion, because then I would lecture for 3 hours, and nobody wants to do that. So I will be brief and just tell you how I see the situation. There is a Deuteronomistic history, but it's a work of a group. It's not just one individual. It's a group of scribes. They have revised the different scrolls that are in this Deuteronomistic library. It was never on one scroll. They were different scrolls, and different different scribes were in charge of these scrolls. It's possible that this Deuteronomistic history started a bit earlier than the exile, maybe in the 7th century, already under a king called Josiah. But it is clear that the exile now, if we read the Deuteronomistic history as we have it, is really the most important point. So if we go to the book of Deuteronomy, which is the first book of the Deuteronomistic history, we can see that the book of Deuteronomy is much inspired by the Assyrian vassal treaties. The Assyrian did vassal treaties with the defeated population in order to foster their obedience to the Assyrian king. And if we take chapter 28, which are the curses for people who not respect these treaties, we can see that they are very similar to an Assyrian treaty, the vassal treaty of Esarhaddon, which was written down in 672 BCE. And we know from archaeological findings that there were many copies of this treaty. And the Assyrians put in every temple a copy of this treaty. So the scribes from the Jerusalem temple, they knew about this, and they inspired the Deuteronomy. They used this treaty in order to formulate the book of Deuteronomy. And one of the main courses in Deuteronomy 28 is the dryness of the soil and the lack of rain. The watering rain will become dust and sand. And so again, we may speculate if we have here, whether we have here a reflection about global warming in the 7th century BCE, but also we can say experiences of drought are quite common. In any case, Deuteronomy 28, you can see it on the screen, shares with the Assyrian treaty the idea that natural catastrophes like lack of rain and famine are to be considered as a divine punishment. Humans must therefore find strategy to soothe the divine angels. If we go on in the Deuteronomistic history, let us stop in the Book of Kings. The Book of Kings speaks about the construction of the temple by Solomon, and there's a long speech after the temple is built in 1 Kings 8, chapter 8 in 1 King. There are different layers again. This, by the way, is a problem of biblical scholarship, because every biblical text was rewritten, revised, so it's very complicated to imagine that there's only one author, but this is another story. So there are several layers in this speech, And if we take it as it is now, you can see on the screen that it's structured in 7 occasions of prayer. And you have the 7 passages on the screen. And what is very interesting, if we look on the place of prayer in the beginning, it's before your altar in this house, so people are still in the temple. Then it's in this house, still in the temple. Then it's towards this house, so you're a little bit away already. And at the end, it's towards the city and the house, so you're away from the city. And at the very end, so it's towards the land. You're even not anymore in the land. You see, it's just a move away and away and away. So it means that the Temple of Jerusalem becomes like a Qibla, what the Muslim expression, a Qibla, a direction of prayer, which we have also, by the way, in the book of Daniel. But what is of interest now for us is that there's also a mention of drought against in one of the occasion of prayer. And this is 8:35-36. You can see it on the screen. The lack of rain is explained as a punishment for the sins of the people. And this is something similar we just saw in chapter 28 on the book of Deuteronomy. So a similar topic appears in the next occasion of prayer, which now mentioned famine and other plagues. In the second occasion, natural catastrophes are brought together with the invasion of an enemy. And this invasion of an enemy maybe still reflect the Assyrian invasion of Judah in 701, or already the Babylonian invasion, which is difficult to see. So we can see in these examples that environmental threats as drought are understood in these texts as divine punishments for a sin or misbehavior of the people. In the Deuteronomistic history, there are not so many other interests for nature, maybe with the exception of 1 Kings 5. In chapter 1 Kings 5, there's a whole discourse about King Solomon, who is such a wise king. But he's also presented as an encyclopedist who takes interest in flora and fauna. As you can see in this verse, 5:13, he spoke about trees from the cedar that's in Lebanon, the hyssop that grows in the wall. He spoke about animals, birds, reptiles, and fish, something which you can have already in the first chapter of the book of Genesis. And this is probably a quite late text that was added in the Persian period, 6th or 5th century. And something similar happens in chapter 4 in the book of Deuteronomy, which is certainly also one of the latest texts of this book. And here the celestial bodies are made by Yahweh for all peoples in order to structure night and day. The heavens are created by Yahweh, and they have nothing divine anymore. In all the texts, the heaven is always almost like a deity. So here Yahweh is the only God who created heaven and earth. His specific relation with Israel is now explained with the idea of election. Because if you have a national God, it's very easy to explain why a people has a direct relation with the national God, because it's the God of this people. But if you claim that your God is also the God of all the world, all the people, how you explain that you have still a special relation with this God? And then they have this idea that, of course, Yahweh is the God of everybody, but he chose Israel as his special people. And this is something, this is developed especially in the book of Deuteronomy. So let us come now to the so-called priestly attitude. The priestly writers, often abbreviated just by P, were probably writing in the early Persian period, maybe in order to prepare the reconstruction of the Second Temple. And they create a history that goes from the origins of the world and goes to the construction of the mobile sanctuary of Israel in the wilderness. So from Genesis to Exodus or even to Leviticus. So this is a construction of a history of origins. The key texts are Genesis 1, the creation of the world. I will come back to this. Exodus 14 is a crossing of Israel through the sea. And Exodus 35 to 14, maybe with the first part of Leviticus, which means we have like a triptych: creation, the victory over the sea often presents chaos, and the establishment of the Creator's God sanctuary. This is something you have also in other ancient Near East mythological texts, especially in Enuma Elish. Enuma Elish, a Babylonian creation story. So for P, there's a profound stability of the world. But what is even more interesting is that P is like creating what we can call an inclusive monotheism. Maybe in Japan you are not so much concerned by this monotheism problem, but in Europe, the so-called monotheistic religions, they're fighting each other because they're all convinced that they have the real God and the other are wrong. But if you look to this text in the Bible, there's not such a problem, because in the priestly texts, God can have different names. Though in the beginning, it's the word that is used for God is Elohim, and this is a word that is used by all humans. Elohim, interestingly, is a word that is a singular, a God, but also plural, gods. So you don't know. And then El Shaddai, which is an expression for Abraham, the God of Abraham, and all his descendants, also the Arabic tribes that are descending from Ismail. And then only through Moses, Yahweh is presenting himself as Yahweh. I appeared to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob as El Shaddai, says Yahweh to Moses. But by my name Yahweh, I did not make myself known to them. So there's no criticism of other gods. It's just Elohim, El Shaddai, Yahweh. And so there's no way, no necessity to fight each other. And this is very compatible with the Persian worldview of a sole, supreme God presiding over all the nations of the empire. So all major identity markers for nascent Judaism are given during the origins, before even entering the land. The Sabbath is there already in the 7th days when God rests and is discovered later by the people. Circumcision is given already to Abraham, Passover already in the Exodus story, and the food regulations in Leviticus. And that's very important, because by situating all the rituals and religious institution in a mythical past, there is a claim that there's no need for a king or a state to enforce the cult. And that's very important. That means that we have here already the invention of the separation between religious practice and political power. Traditionally, political power is enhancing or legitimating religious practice. And here we say it's all given in the origins, before they had a king, before even they were in the land. So religions can be independent. And this, I think, it's important. And this is also what Judaism was living all throughout his history. So if we come back to the first chapter in Genesis 1, there is this creation of the world in a very peaceful way. It's orderly, it's in a rhythm of the creative act, which takes place in the framework of a week, 6 days of work, 1 day of rest. There's no idea of a creation out of nothing. There's no creatio ex nihilo. There is an organization of the primordial chaos by the creator God, but the chaos was there before. There are a number of elements in this text that pre-exist the first divine word. The tohu vabohu, which can be translated as a chaotic state, darkness, primordial ocean, called in Hebrew Tehom, maybe deriving from the same root as the Mesopotamian monster Tiamat, which needs to be fought by Marduk. But he has no fight at all, because everything is created by the divine words and by acts of separation. And these acts gradually define a domain of life for plants, for animals, and for humans. So it's not exactly the same as we have in the Enuma Elish, where we have also this idea that the chaos must be fighted and vanquished, but it's a very dramatic fight. Here in Genesis 1, it's very quiet. So you can see on this screen a way how the ancient imagined the world by separation of the waters above and the waters below, by this firmament and the divine dwelling over the oceans. And if you look on the flood story, you can see then the waters above the firmament, there will be openings in the firmament and everything will come down. So the chaos is coming back. But this we'll see in a while. So we can see that unlike the Babylonian myth, the biblical account seems at first sight to be written from a monotheistic perspective. But this is also a questionable assumption. Monotheism is a very complicated concept. Maybe it's not so important in Japanese culture, but in European culture, there was always the idea that monotheism is a kind of evolution of the religious history of humanity. And if you look a little bit closer, we should not forget that in the end of Enuma Elish already, in this Babylonian creation account, we have a kind of an almost monotheistic reading of the Babylonian pantheon, because all the function and powers of the other gods are attributed to Marduk. Marduk, which becomes a major god of the Babylonians. So there's 50 or 51 names of Marduk. So is it already monotheistic or not? But the thing is that the borders are not so clearly cut between monotheism and polytheism. And as I said already, the term Elohim allows for reading as a singular, but also for reading as a plural. So it's not so clear that we can have a clear cut between monotheism and polytheism. It's maybe a concept that is used and should be used, but we have to be also careful not to heavily create opposition between monotheism and polytheism. Let's come now to the creation of the human beings. The creation of the human beings is very interesting because for all the other things that God's creating in Genesis 1, he just say, this shall happen and it happens, this shall happen and it happens. And when it comes to humans, all of a sudden, God makes a deliberation. Let us make humankind in our image, according to our model. It will subjugate the fish of the sea, the birds of the sky, the animals on the earth, all the creatures that creeps upon the earth. So God created humankind in his image. In the image of God, he created them, male and female, he created them. So, I don't know if you noticed something. Let us make. Why the plural? Why God say, let us make? Is there one God or several gods? Why is this plural? You can say it's a plural of majesty, but it's not really much attested in the Hebrew Bible, plural of majesty. Some people would say it's a divine court, but then again, we are not so much in a monotheistic thing. It's a divine court, so God is speaking to his ministers, his helpers. But then the problem is the image of God is male and female. And this is often forgotten, male and female. So if you say, let us make humans in our image, and God creates them male and female, what can we say? It means that there is maybe still a souvenir, remembering of a divine couple, because the God of Israel, Yahweh, was also related to goddess Asherah. And of course, in the exile, this goddess Asherah disappeared already. But there is a kind of a remembering, a remaining of this divine couple, and which is also very interesting. This is also interesting for gender discussion. Here in the first text of the Bible, male and female are image of God. So the human couple is a kind of a sublimation of the divine couple. And what does mean image of God? Image of God is a royal title. In Mesopotamia or in Egypt, the king is said to be the image of God. The pharaoh or Marduk or Asarhaddon, the king Asarhaddon, is said to be the image of Shamash, the god of the sun, or the image of Marduk. So the king is the representative of the god, the mediator between the gods and the people. And if you look on iconography, we can see that God and the king are represented in a similar manner. You have here on the screen, on the left, you have an Assyrian king standing on a hybrid animal, probably the god Assur. On the other hand, you have the king Esarhaddon. And if you compare both pictures, you can see that they are depicted in a very similar way, the king and the god. That means that you can understand what does it mean to be the image of God. And then if we come back to the Bible, this idea that now the whole humankind is image of God, how can we understand it? We can understand it as a democratization of the royal ideology. After the fall of Jerusalem, there was no king anymore in Judah. So this title, image of God, is now applied to the whole humanity. And this is also something quite exceptional. And the human beings now have two functions: to be fruitful and multiply, and this is a king function, to have dominion over the other animal, to have dominion over the fish of the sea, the birds of the air, and over every living that moves upon the earth, as it said in Genesis 1, verse 28. If we compare this insistence of being fruitful and multiply with the Mesopotamian myth, we see an interesting difference. You know probably that the story of the flood is also told in Mesopotamian texts. And in Mesopotamian texts, especially in myths called Atrahasis, or also in the Gilgamesh epos, what happens in the beginning is that the gods they first create humans in order that they work for them, but then they are indisposed because the humans are making too much noise. They're making too much noise, and the gods say they are too noisy, too loud, and they are too many. So we have to find a way to reduce them. They do all kinds of stuff: famine, wild animals, infertility, but it does not help. So they say, okay, let us do the flood and wipe them all out. And okay, this happened. And then at the end of the flood, the gods said they won't do the flood anymore, but they still have different strategy to reduce the number of human beings. So even after the flood, the goddess of birth intervenes to prevent too abundant births, in striking women with infertility or provoking stillbirth, or even in creating castes of taboo women who cannot have sexual relations. So in the Mesopotamian tradition, after the flood, there's still this idea that the gods want to reduce the numbers of humans. And this is different in the Bible. In the Bible, we have two different flood stories that are combined into one. But at the end of both of these stories, we still have this same order: be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth. So there is a counter history in regards to the Mesopotamian flood accounts. And this may be reflecting economic, political, and ideological changes in the Persian period. So the priestly authors apparently had welcomed favorably the integration of Judea into the Persian Empire, and he wants to show that humanity living under the eyes of the god or the gods corresponds to the set of peoples united in the Persian Empire under the Persian great king. So the priestly story of the flood, I will finish in 1 minute, shows that there's a new deal, there's a redefinition, but the multiplication is still affirmed. There's no more order to subdue the earth. And there's also another change which is important. If you look in the first chapter of creation in Genesis 1, animals and humans are vegetarians. I don't know if you like it or not, but this is the idea in Genesis 1. We should not eat any animals, and the animals should not eat each other. So after the flood, this is changed, though there's a possibility to do that. And this is legitimated by the sacrifice of animals that implies also the deities into this eating. So there is an explanation why the creation is not as good as it was thought to be in Genesis 1, but still there's an importance that the humans should multiply. So let us come to an end and just summarize the 3 different ways to deal with crisis and environment in the Bible. We had the prophetic attitude, the mandarin attitude, and the priestly attitude. The prophetic attitude is a future-oriented rhetoric that pretends that the crisis will be followed by a kind of paradisiacal situation. There's an idea of a new creation and a harmony between human nature and animals. The so-called mandarin attitude is the explanation of the crisis and no much interest in environment. Natural catastrophes are seen as a divine punishment. And finally, the priestly attitude is a construction of a past, but that offers rituals for the present. And there's an interest for the place of all humans with the animals and their environment. So thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Professor Rumor. And let's go on to Professor Ichikawa's comment.
Oh, thank you very much. In the beginning, as Professor Rema is a professor of biblical studies, I briefly explain what is biblical studies. Biblical studies is the scientific approach to the Bible. In this discipline, the Bible is not treated as the revelation of the supreme God, but as a literary product of the ancient Israelite people. Biblical studies try to elucidate the historical background of the Bible and to examine the process of the compilation of the Bible and to investigate the ideas and thoughts of the Bible by means of historical discipline, philological discipline, archaeological, and other disciplines. In this lecture, Professor Rema made use of the socio-religious discipline to investigate the crisis management of the Bible. As biblical studies is secular studies, therefore, it may happen that biblical studies sometimes unintentionally destined to lead to the collisions and frictions with theological approaches. Today's lecture is not related to the academic conference of the biblical studies, so that before my comments, I'd like to know the professor's cultural background. So you have now teaching in Paris, but you were born in Mannheim, Germany, and studied in Switzerland, took PhD at University of Geneva, and taught at the University of Lausanne. And then since 2007, you have come to Collège de France. You have lived at least 3 different countries in Europe and experienced, I guess, cultural differences. So let me ask several questions concerning your life. Is there any influence from your parents concerning your decision to live and study abroad? And what did make you choose your profession of biblical scholar? And to whom do you owe most in terms of your life and your academic achievement? Now, let me present my comments to your lecture. You have analyzed 3 different religious conceptions concerning the crisis management. These 3 aspects, different discourses, seem to have affinity, respectively, to certain social strata, namely prophetic, mandarin, and priestly strata. This is very typical analysis of the Weberian social religious research. I was very touched by your perceptive analysis full of points of discussion. May I cite impressive, wonderful phrases and passages from your lecture? The Babylonian exile as a new origin myth. There are environmental reasons for the exile and the foreign diaspora, because global warming during the 6th century BCE and decrease of temperature around 500 to 450 BCE. Deuteronomist is Israel's first historian to explain the events of 587. But this is Martin Luther's opinion. Now, Deuteronomy history never existed in one scroll. And Enuma Elish, the tablet 7, has a almost monotheistic reading of the Babylonian pantheon. And the priestly author has welcomed favorably the integration of Judea into Persian Empire. And it is sufficed to end quote. But concerning most of these biblical authors, I wonder if they come from those who have returned from the Babylonian exile, or from those who kept living in Babylonian diaspora. I'd like to elucidate my question. My first comment is related to the socio-religious analysis of Weberian school. To tell the truth, I took this theme as my master's thesis almost 50 years ago. I learned that this tradition is still popular in Europe. As you mentioned, analysis of the ethos of social strata was typical of Max Weber's researches. According to my understanding, Weber's analysis has 2 tasks for his comparative studies of work ethics of world religions. He poses the principle as ideal types of universally validated affinity between a certain social stratum and their religious consciousness, and uses it as a measure to grasp the society concerned, to find the construction of the society and its ethos and religious consciousness. So to know social strata and their religious consciousness is crucially important means by which to find the historical uniqueness and characteristics of the society concerned. To elucidate the social strata is important, but to know the specific characteristics of the ethos of the society concerned as a whole is another thing. The latter is exactly the second task of the society of Weberian sociology. So Max Weber tried to identify the work ethics of the ancient Judaism compared with Protestantism or Confucianism or Taoism. So in this respect, we have to ask you, what kind of cultural uniqueness has the ancient Judaism achieved in terms of, say, crisis management and response to natural disasters? In order to answer this question, we have to analyze the relation of these different social strata and their mutual influence, and the rise and fall of the powerful stratum, and so on, using historical and comparative perspectives. So what I would like to know best is a conclusion next to the last slide. As a result of Professor Rehmer's analysis, we can discern three different notions of crisis management incorporated in the Hebrew Bible. If so, can you say that the Bible, which was compiled by the corporate endeavors of all three different strata, has a unique, distinct value as a whole and cannot be reduced to each social stratum? In this respect, we can say, or can we say, that the Bible is unique comparing with literary products of contemporary neighboring peoples in the Mesopotamian religion? According to your analysis, each of the three parts of the Bible, namely the Torah, the law, the Pentateuch, and prophets, and other writings, has contained various notions of crisis management. For example, the Pentateuch, the five books of Moses, has all three prophetic and mandarin and priestly notions. In such a case, are there any preference or the order of value judgment between three different notions? Was the prophetic group of primary importance or not? Did the mandarin have the authority to compile, or did priestly caste resort to the divine power of the temple ritual? According to the conventional knowledge of the compilation of the Hebrew Bible, the Pentateuch was completed by around 300 BCE, and the books of the prophets were by 200 BCE. And since then, the Bible becomes the Holy Scripture, and it came to be learned and used as a legitimate authority. And then the Bible has come to the influential book to the present era. Here, a new stage of the influential history of the Bible, namely the so-called Wirkungsgeschichte, has arrived. So we have to ask whether Judaism and Christianity, in their long history of biblical exegesis, have recognized these three different attitudes to crisis management or not. But this is out of the scope of this lecture. But it proves that this lecture gives impetus to the far-reaching influence to various research and concerns. I appreciate you very much. And now come to the second comment. Seeing from the Far East, Europe has been Christian countries, and we are inclined to think that everybody in Europe has studied the Bible, and everybody has somewhat knowledge about the Bible. Therefore, we feel that there is a difference in cultural perception of the Bible. And therefore, the German and French people have nurtured different approaches to the Bible. The reason for that is, firstly, France has been a Catholic country, and French people have cultivated the distinct spirit of Montaigne and Pascal, which has become national ethos. On the other hand, Germany has made progress in freely interpreting the Bible and developed the tradition of brave analysis of the Bible since the Reformation of Martin Luther by declaring the slogan, solely the Bible, solely the faith. The Bible is the solely important, not Pope, not hierarchy of the church. So Professor Rehmer, you have lived in 2 countries, or 3, including Switzerland, and have been familiar with both French and German attitudes to the Bible and Christianity. You are a biblical scholar, but can you say that your academic achievements are the products of secular tradition of French Enlightenment philosophy? Oh, I just mistake. Oh. Your academic achievements are the products of secular biblical studies. If so, you will be probably looked upon as a biblical scholar in terms of the tradition of French Enlightenment philosophy. Have you ever experienced such a problem of identity of the academic style of your own in your academic life? Have you ever felt troubled in the relation between the biblical studies and Christian theology? How did you make balance or compromise or neglect theological approach? If we ask this question in terms of today's lecture's topic, the question will be posed like this. 3 notions of the crisis management in the lecture's conclusion have relevance to the modern contemporary problem of climate change and environmental morality, namely prophetic message of hope for the future, mandarin emphasis upon the consciousness of sin and remorse, and priestly sense of order and cosmos. As this lecture's conclusion contains proper responses to our contemporary problem, it seems highly recommended to make use this lecture as the educational material for high school students in Paris, in France. I don't know whether such biblical studies are permitted to teach at the public high school with the laicite policy in the French government. However, today's lecture should be regarded as a model lecture for college students for tackling contemporary problems of the climate change and environmental morality. Are you ready to provide your students with a curriculum of teaching topics of contemporary issues in terms of the biblical studies? Or you have already endeavored to do so in your university, have you? Christian countries like France will be our best place to have dialogues between Christian theology and secular biblical studies for the sake of future European civilization. Finally, as today's commentator, I'm thinking, I wonder if I could find such an intelligible material as the Bible in pursuit of crisis management in the classical literature of the East in general, and in Japanese past in particular. I'm still endeavoring, but I can say today's lecture has made a difference in my approach to the Bible and world classics. Thank you very much for your contribution today.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Professor Ichikawa. Professor Ruma, do you want to briefly respond? There were several big questions in Professor Ichikawa.
Yes, first of all, I would like to thank my colleague Ichikawa for this very, very nice summary, and also the very, very important questions you raised. So you raised 2 kinds of questions, more personal questions about my background, and maybe more general questions about the way to teach these texts in France or in Germany, and the difference of. So I will try to summarize, because I should be brief, as I was told. So first of all, I think you're right. You are always influenced by your own history and by your own background. So, but I don't want to, and I have no time to tell my whole story. But what is important that in a German background is my parents were Protestant and the Bible was present. So my mother was reading the Bible every evening. So I was intrigued by this book, and I got interest in this book. But my parents never pushed me to this. They experienced World War II. They lost everything, and they had to flee from East Germany to West Germany. And so my parents always say, you have to do what you want. So if you want to do this, you can do this. If you want to do medical research, you can do whatever. So I never felt, in a way, pushed to do this. So it was my own decision in a way, which was not really a decision, because first of all, I wanted to do French and theology in order to be a high school teacher of French. And but then I was disorganized and I just missed the inscription for French and I was left with theology. So I studied theology. And then again, as you said, I had an encounter with a very important professor, which is Rolf Rentorf, who was challenging a lot of theories about the Pentateuch. And I think without him, I would never had this interest also, because it's a historical, it's a philosophical, a sociological interest for this book. For me, it's not just a book, it's a whole library. And I agree with you that in the different countries of Germany, the Bible has not the same status. But in Germany, when I was doing my studies, it was, of course, considered to be part of a universitary curriculum. In France, it's different, as you mentioned. In France, that's not so many places to do biblical research in a secular way. So we have the Collège de France, and then we have, but is it secular or not? We have the situation of Alsace, which is especially the city of Strasbourg. This is the only city in France where you have theological faculty, Catholic and Protestant faculties, because Strasbourg, Alsace was part of Germany. When in 1905, the French decided to separate church and state. And so all the faculties of theology were privatized. It means that they were run by the churches, so it's very different. And you're right, so the status of the Bible is not at all the same in Germany and in France, for instance. So France, as you said, is the Catholic countries. People don't know so much about the Bible. They know that the Bible exists, but they have no really idea what is in the Bible. In Germany, there's a Bible culture. You can even in the German parliament, sometimes deputies, they can just quote the Bible. And this would never happen in France. So this is very different. So the Bible is more part of the culture, and also the German language was very much shaped by the translation of the Bible into German by Martin Luther. And so there's a lot of like proverbs that are still used today in German, and people don't even know this comes from the Bible, because this was the way that Luther translated it. So I totally agree that in different backgrounds, maybe the Bible in Europe has not exactly the same status. But it's also a problem, what you can call in France, especially biblical analphabetism. So people don't know about the Bible. So people, for studying, for instance, they study history of art. There are so many representations of biblical scenes they cannot understand. So, for instance, the sacrifice of Abraham, sometimes they don't know what it is. So what is this? An old man who's trying to kill a young lad? So nobody knows. So now a lot of professors of history of art, they claim that there should be biblical instruction, which is not very emphasized in the French curriculum. So, okay, for this, and then very briefly about the different ways to look on a crisis: priestly, mandarin, prophetic. You were asking who won the game. It's different to know who won the game. What is interesting that these three attitudes are all part of the Tanakh, of the Hebrew Bible, and that means also that they didn't maybe want to decide which voice is the only one. And I think what is interesting, if you look even on contemporary issues of crisis, environmental crisis or other, you can identify this kind of attitudes also today in a way, if you use this Weberian approach, because you said Weber, you did your PhD already on Weber, and I think he's still used. We just had this private discussion. So Weber, of course, he had an idea of the evolution of the biblical text, which was related to what you know from his time. So if Weber would live today, probably he would see things a little bit different. But still, I think it's kind of important. And so maybe I stop in order to get some time for the other questions.
Yes, there are many good questions from the audience today, and let me pick some. The first one is from someone named Shuichi Hasegawa,
Which
you may recognize. How do you think the global warming in the time of Babylonian exile influenced the composition or formation of the primeval history? The one of the main themes of which is a relationship between the nature and
Yes.
human being.
Yes.
It seems the author slash editor regards the evilness of a human as desolating the land. Do you think this attitude is close to that of priests or something else?
Yeah, thank you very much, Chuichi, for this question. That gives me the opportunity to come back a little bit to the flood story, because maybe I said it too briefly. This is a very common myth in the ancient Near East. So we have it already in the second millennium in Sumerian texts, and we have it in Atrahasis and Gilgamesh, and even in Berossus. So this idea of the flood is very common, but it's also clear that the biblical account has some specificities. So especially that, as we have seen in the Babylonian, at least those who give the reasons for the flood, they said that the gods think that the humans are too noisy, and there's no ethical or moral impact. And in the Bible, it said that that the evil or the violence had spread all over the place. And so there is a kind of a connection between the way that the people behave, that mankind behaves, and the flood. And so I think I haven't thought really about this. So it's an interesting suggestion that this may be also related to some environmental issues, because nowadays you spoke about the Wirkungsgeschichte, also the history of reception. I think nowadays a lot of people that do environment, they use the flood also in a way to say this is maybe one of the first texts there is a concern of the fragility of our world and danger that this can all collapse. And maybe the idea to put the flood story into this origin story can be triggered also by this. I think they, when they were in Babylon, they had knowledge of the Babylonian myths, and they learned about the flood story probably. So maybe the first who integrated it into its work is maybe the priestly author, as suggested by Professor Hasegawa. Yeah.
Let's move on to some other questions. There are a couple of related questions. So let me go through those together. Concerning the dichotomy of monotheism and polytheism, how will you situate monolatry?
Monolatry.
Monolatry. Okay. Do you regard it as a form of polytheism, or an immature state of monotheism, or none of the above? And a related question, I think, is if Old Testament has many interpretations of the polytheism, then when did Christianity get to have absolute tendency of monotheism? And another related question is in Judaism, when did strict monotheism was established, if it was ever established?
Okay. Okay, I will try to bring all these questions together. Thank you very much for these important questions. So first of all, monolatry, traditional monolatry is described as the focus on one God without denying the existence of other gods. So for instance, in the oldest layers of Deuteronomy, you have this idea that Israel should just follow the God Yahweh and not walk after the other gods, not follow the other gods. So that means that the existence of the other gods is not denied, but they are not of importance for Deuteronomy. They are even kind of a threat, that they're a danger. So maybe monolatry is kind of between monotheism and polytheism. So the question of a strict monotheism, it's complicated to answer, because it all depends on the definition that you give to monotheism. For instance, if you take the book of Job, this is a book that has a problem how to explain the suffering of somebody who's considered to be just. And in the beginning, you have this heavenly court where God is sitting, and there are different ministers, and then Satan is coming, and he's a kind of introducing the question whether Job is fearing God without any ideas of reward or not. And so there is heavily caught, there is Satan. So is this monotheism or not? So in a way you can say it's monotheism, but still they use a concept of a divine court. So it's very complicated. I don't know. There was a Catholic biblical scholar called Pierre Gibert who said the monotheism is very difficult to think. It's very difficult the concept of monotheism, because what is a strict monotheism? For instance, in the Christian religion, you have the angels, especially in Catholic, you have the angels, you have the saints. So are we still in monotheism, or is this kind of polytheistic heritage? It's very complicated. And also for Christianity, what does it mean if in Christianity you see that Jesus is the Son of God? And there is this Trinity. Is this monotheism or not? So in the polemics between Muslims, Jews, and Christians, though the Christians were often accused not to be monotheistic because they have this idea of a Son of God, of the angels, of Satan who's fighting. So I think monotheism is, I would not know to say what is a strict monotheism. Of course, in a general way, you can see we have three monotheistic major religions, which is Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, but there's still polytheistic heritage. So I think if you have a too abstract concept of God, you always need some mediations. And so these mediations can be the angels, can be the saints, can be Jesus or whatever. So yeah, I would be careful to speak about a strict monotheism. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Moving on to next good question. Where does the wisdom literature, and mostly the Psalms that also reflect on the exile, fall in the reaction to this crisis management, or reaction to this crisis?
The wisdom literature, if you take wisdom literature in a strict sense, these are the books of Proverbs, the book of Kohelet, and the book of the Ecclesiastes, the book of Job. They are more concerned by the stability of the world, so the order of the world. And so some of these books are very much claiming this order. Others are questioning the order also in regards to God, because there is a problem, which is still a problem until today, what is called sometimes retribution. So the idea somebody who's acting well, he will be rewarded. And somebody who's acting badly, there will be punishment. And it never really works in reality. So the books are concerned with this. So they are not so much, maybe the exile is somewhere in the afterground, but they are not so much concerned by this. They are more concerned by how to guarantee or to challenge the stability of the world. Their psalms there are very different genres of psalms, and there are some psalms, as the question was asking, they're speaking also about the destruction of the temple. And some psalms are close to the priestly worldview, others are more closely to the Deuteronomistic worldview. So in the psalms, we have to decide which psalms we want to take.
Okay, thank you. And I think this is a related question. Could you make comments on the history of Joseph of Egypt and how it might or not be related to the topic of attitudes towards environmental crisis and the management of the crisis?
So the Joseph story in the end of the book of Genesis tells the story of how Joseph, who was sold by his brothers to Egypt, makes a very, very good career in Egypt, becomes second to the king, even becomes the son-in-law of a priest in Heliopolis. This is a story about the Egyptian diaspora. We spoke a lot about the Babylonian diaspora. We did not speak much about the Egyptian diaspora. And this is a different worldview in the Egyptian diaspora. I had no time to mention it in my paper, so I'm thankful for the question. This is another way to see the diaspora situation. In Egypt, apparently they were more open also to interact with the Egyptians, because as we see, Joseph is very close to the Egyptian culture. He's behaving like an Egyptian. At the end of his life, he's embalmed like the Egyptians. So this is a discourse of how you can integrate in a diaspora situation and also being in contact. If you look in the book of Deuteronomy, we have more the idea that, okay, you are in diaspora, but you have to keep your own identity and you have to separate from the others. Whereas in the Joseph story, it's very much about interacting and even saying that we have several things in common with the Egyptians. So for instance, when Joseph is interpreting the dreams of Pharaoh, they both speaks about Elohim. So it comes a little bit close to P, because both are speaking about Elohim and there's no theological problem. So maybe Pharaoh is thinking about the gods of Egypt and Joseph is thinking about the God of Israel, but they have no problem. There's no fight. In this regards, maybe if I go back to my three ideal types, I would say it's the closest is probably P for the Joseph story. Yeah.
Thank you very much. I think we are winding down to the close of this talk, but Professor Ichikawa, do you want to add something or no? Okay. So we covered all the, or Professor Ruma covered all your
Not
comments.
all, probably not.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, Professor Ruma. This has been a very interesting. I'm not, I'm far from expert in this field, but I enjoyed your discussion, and it's very interesting to see that literature or the writing in the Bibles help us think about environment today and the crisis management, and we can see a lot of lessons on those. And thank you very much.
Thank you.
So this ends the webinar today, featuring Professor Roma and commentator Professor Ichikawa. So for those of you who listened to the webinar, thank you very much for listening to this. And after we switch for the ending screen, you will see a QR code, which you can use to support us. Thank you very much.